Merry Christmas. We've officially entered into the holiday season marked by love, joy, and peace, chaos, craziness, and credit card bills. Am I right? Christmas means a lot of things to a lot of us. But to children, Christmas typically means one thing. And what's that? That's right, presents. Can you remember the anticipation you felt as a kid as you prepared to rip the paper off those brightly wrapped packages under the tree? And the rush of excitement when the torn paper revealed the very thing you'd been hoping and praying for every day in December. Think about one of your favorite gifts you received as a child. One year, when I was probably about 4 or 5, I ripped open that paper to find the hottest doll on the market, Baby Alive. They still make a version of this doll today, but back in the 70s, this was the Rolls Royce of baby dolls. She came with these little food packets that you could mix with water to make baby food, and you'd put it in her mouth, and you'd push this lever on her back to make her chew and swallow, just like a real baby. And then you know where that food would end up, don't you? Sure, some of it trickled down to the doll-sized diapers, but I'm guessing a lot of it dried up into a crusty mess inside of Baby Alive. Man, I loved that thing. Carried it with me everywhere we went. There was nothing better than unwrapping the gift you'd hoped and prayed for. But there was also nothing worse than being disappointed. Were your hopes ever crushed on Christmas morning? We came across a clip from Jimmy Kimmel that I admit is a little bit cruel, but it's also pretty funny. Kimmel challenged parents to give their kids a terrible present and film the reaction. You would not believe how quickly hope turns to disappointment when instead of a PS4 or Xbox, kids are opening up bottles of half-empty fruit juice or a used battery or a half-eaten sandwich. Now, just in case your soft heart was crushed by this prank, I will let you know that Kimmel issued this challenge a few weeks before Christmas, so this was not Christmas morning. Does that help? Maybe not. Most of us don't like to see kids disappointed. But it's not just kids. As adults, we don't like to be disappointed either. And I'm not talking about that ugly Christmas sweater you got from your Aunt Ethel or the fruitcake you received from your boss. I'm talking about real struggles, unfulfilled dreams, dashed hopes. You see, Christmas tends to be a season where we reflect on all the things that matter most to us, and sometimes mixed with the joy is also a lot of pain. We had hopes for our families, but we feel the emptiness of those we've lost or the distance of those who have grown apart. We had hopes for our career, but we dread going to the office. We had hopes for financial security, but the bills are piling up. We had hopes for health, but the news from the doctor wasn't great. We had hopes for happiness, but the gifts are unwrapped and the tree is taken down, and we find a familiar restlessness at the end of it all. Yes, Christmas is a time of love, joy, and peace, but let's give each other permission to be honest about the disappointments we face in this season as well. Sometimes our lives don't look anything like a picture print by Currier and Ives. But here's the thing we want everyone to understand today and all throughout this Christmas season. Even when things don't go our way, we can remain hopeful. If Christmas means anything, it means this one thing: there is hope for everyone. No matter the challenges, no matter the unfulfilled dreams, no matter the disappointments, there is hope for everyone. And this Christmas, we want to grab hold of that hope together. Today we are starting our Christmas series that bears that name. And during this series, we're looking at the lives of many familiar and possibly not so familiar people from the Christmas story. Now understand that by the time Jesus came on the scene, the people of Israel had been waiting on the promised Messiah for hundreds of years, only to see their hopes disappointed year after year after year. And my guess is many had lost hope and wondered if God was ever going to come through on his promises. Two of the people who had been waiting a long time were a couple by the name of Zechariah and Elizabeth. Now, they may not be the most familiar characters in the Christmas story, but they are significant ones. Zechariah and Elizabeth had a lot of reasons to feel disappointment in life beyond the long wait for the Messiah. And today we're going to talk about dealing with disappointment by learning from their story. Today, we're going to listen to what hope says to us in the midst of our disappointments. Well, we meet Zechariah and Elizabeth in the first chapter of the book of Luke. In fact, they are the first two major characters in the Christmas story. The historian Luke writes that in the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron, and both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Now understand, when it says they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, that disappointment may have had far-reaching implications in their society. You know, I've had many friends who have had to endure the heartache of not being able to have a child. It's one of the most painful things that I've ever watched people walk through. If you're someone who has struggled with infertility, my guess is you know exactly the depth of the pain that Elizabeth and Zechariah are feeling. But in addition to their own sense of unfulfilled longing, their childlessness is also a source of shame. Elizabeth herself refers to it as a disgrace later on in the chapter. You see, in ancient Jewish culture, a childless woman was viewed as a cursed woman. On top of her pain, Elizabeth is carrying the condemnation of people who think that her barrenness is the result of her sin. And she has borne the shame well into her old age. Yet Luke tells us that both Elizabeth and Zechariah were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. Do you know what that means? Sometimes good, righteous people have deep, painful disappointments in their lives. Have you ever felt like you were being punished when something bad happened in your life? Have you ever wondered if things might be different if you were just a better person, a better Christian? You know, sometimes we get it into our heads that bad things don't happen to good people, but in Zechariah and Elizabeth's story, we discover that that's just not true. I mean, they are good, faithful people who face some painful, disappointing circumstances. Well, Luke continues. He says, once when Zechariah's division was on duty, and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. Now let me explain what is going on here. By lineage, Zechariah is a member of the priesthood. He would have been one out of 18,000 priests at the time. And a priest only got the privilege of officiating at the altar in the temple once in his lifetime, and this opportunity was determined by a lottery of sorts. So with 18,000 priests, I'm guessing Zechariah's chances of getting selected weren't very good. In fact, think about how many times he'd seen someone else's lot get drawn. Time after time, year after year, Zechariah lined up for the casting of lots. And time after time, year after year, he wasn't chosen. And now he's an old man. Do you think he's even hoping for the honor anymore? Or has he resigned himself that it just probably isn't ever going to happen? I'm sharing all of this with you because I just want us to understand that Zechariah and Elizabeth had been waiting a long time for what they hoped for. I mean, they've been disappointed time and time again, yet they remained faithful. They continued to follow God's laws and commands. They never grew bitter. As we get ready to look at what is about to happen in their lives, the first thing I think we need to hear about hope is that sometimes hope says wait. When we are face to face with our disappointments, when all we longed for remains unfulfilled, when it seems like we have been forgotten, hope says wait. It's never too late for hope to enter the story. So Zechariah enters the temple to light the incense on the altar. And suddenly Gabriel, an angel of the Lord, he shows up and he interrupts the ceremony. And Luke tells us that Zechariah is startled and he's gripped with fear. You think? But the angel says to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayers have been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son." Now, my guess is Zechariah had long ago given up praying for a son. After all, both he and Elizabeth, they're now very old, and they'd probably given up on the possibility of this ever happening. He's probably thinking, oh no, I can't let Elizabeth get her hopes up again. We've been down this road. We've moved on. It would just be too painful for us to get our hopes up only to have them dashed again. But Gabriel gets more specific, speaking as though it's a done deal. He says, "You are to call him John, and he will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord." Gabriel also ties John to a well-known Old Testament prophecy, saying John would be the one who would come in the spirit and the power of Elijah to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Well, still in a state of shock over the presence of this heavenly being, Zechariah seeks some kind of assurance. How can I be sure of this? I'm an old man, and my wife is well along in years. Translation: we are way too old for this to happen. But the mighty angel's response is this: "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I've been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news." Now, don't you wish you could have been a fly on the wall and heard the tone with which Gabriel said this? Was it just matter-of-fact informative? I don't think so. I think we have an angel here who is just a little bit ticked off at Zach's response to the good news. A modern translation might be, "Look, numbskull, don't you understand who you're talking to? I am Gabriel. I have come straight from God." Well, ticked off or not, Gabriel's response to Zechariah's doubt is to inform him that you will be silent and not able to speak until this, John's birth, happens, because you did not believe my words. See, what Zechariah needed to remember when he came face to face with Gabriel is that the God he worships is the God of the possible. Nothing is impossible with God. As a priest in Israel, Zechariah would have been very well schooled in the Torah, which told a much-loved story of another childless couple who were blessed with a child. Abraham and Sarah also were well beyond childbearing years when God blessed them with a son. Now, ironically, Zechariah's very name means God has remembered. But in the most critical moment of his life, he has a hard time believing that God has remembered him. But isn't that patently true of us too? Often we believe in the abstract, but we doubt God in the particular. We believe that God cares about all people. We just question if he cares about us. We believe that God so loved the world, but we're not always certain he loves us. We believe that he hears and answers prayers, yet we doubt he's listening to us. But hope says, remember. Remember what God has promised. Remember how God has been faithful in the past. Remember that nothing is impossible with God. Hope says, remember. Luke tells us that after this, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant. The time for doubting is past. Hope has now become a reality, and now it is time to celebrate. Elizabeth says, "The Lord has done this for me. He has shown his favor. He's taken away my disgrace among the people." Zechariah too sings a song of praise to God, and they name this child John, which means God is gracious. Now, with the birth of this child, Elizabeth feels this cloak of shame removed. A son would carry on the family name for his and also care for his parents in their old age. And it was now time for them to celebrate God's graciousness. And it's just like God to do immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine. Zechariah and Elizabeth, they wanted a son, but what they got was a prophet, a man of whom Jesus himself said, "Among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist." Their wait had been long. Their wait had been painful. But when hope was fulfilled, it was even better than they had even dreamed. However, we all know that not all stories end like theirs. In fact, many don't. Sometimes hope doesn't lead to the exact thing that we're longing for. Sometimes it leads us in a completely different direction. I've experienced that firsthand. There are things I've hoped for that haven't come to me yet. There were dreams that I chased that ended up being dead ends. I know what it feels like to be disappointed. And my guess is you do too. But here's the thing. God's goodness, it isn't reserved for hope fulfilled. It can also be found in our disappointments. God's graciousness can be found in every step of the journey. I've experienced this firsthand too. His goodness has come to me through thoughtful people, through new opportunities, through important lessons learned. Hope can help us see that even a roadblock may not be an end, but a fresh turn in the journey. Someone once said, there is gold to be found even in our disappointments. Do we believe that? See, we can become so fixated on what hasn't happened or what we don't have that we miss out on all the goodness that God has for us along the way. Hope reminds us to trust in God's goodness. When facing our disappointments, perhaps we need to step back and ask ourselves, what can I be learning from this? How can I enjoy life even though I don't currently have what I want? Where do I see God's goodness even in the middle of my disappointment? Regardless of whether or not God gives us exactly what we want, we believe that God will give us what we need. Sometimes that'll be answering our prayers just the way we asked. Sometimes it'll be far more than we could ask or imagine. But even when the answer isn't what we wanted or expected, we can trust that God has good things for us to experience and enjoy in the process. Hope says trust. Trust in the goodness of God. What is it that keeps us going from one day to the next? What gives us the ability to fight our way through periods of discouragement or depression? What makes us believe that one day things will be better? It's a 4-letter word that has enormous power to turn failure into success and weakness into strength. And that word is hope. You see, even in the middle of our biggest disappointments, there is hope. When we come face to face with our struggles, our unfulfilled longings, and our deepest pain, hope says, wait. It's never too late for hope to enter the story. Hope says, remember. God has not forgotten you. Think of all the ways that He's been faithful to you in the past, and remember, nothing is impossible for Him. And hope says trust. Recognize God is at work, and there may be goodness to be found, even when our paths look different than we imagined they would be. Wait, remember, trust. In the middle of whatever you are facing today, know that there is hope. 2,000 years after the time of Zechariah and Elizabeth, the Jewish people faced another dark time in history. It was a time of unspeakable horror, unthinkable pain. In fact, the word disappointment doesn't even do it justice. If ever someone had reason to give up hope, it was now. Yet hope survived. When the Allied troops reached Auschwitz and they liberated the camp, they found these words scratched into the walls in one of the barracks. It said, "I believe in the sun, even though I don't see it shine. I believe in love, though I don't see it expressed. And I believe in God, even though I can't hear Him speak." Understand, the hope of a Christ follower, it's not blind optimism or pretense. Our hope is rooted in a historical happening 2,000 years ago in a little town called Bethlehem. Here another child was born, the Savior of the world, and He came so that we could find our way back to God and live with the hope that one day there will be no more pain, no more unmet longing, no more disappointment. As the Christmas carol so beautifully recalls, the hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. Jesus is our hope. He is the hope of the world, and that hope is for everyone.